Good morning, Biology 102. I am back with part 2 of the endocrine system. We are traveling down the glands and the hormones that those glands produce in the body, and now we are going below the brain. So we talked about the brain and some of the glands and hormones in part 1, and so now we're below the brain and going from the top of your body down. We are next going to stop in our neck, kind of around the larynx area. There is this butterfly-shaped gland. You can see it over here in this picture. It is called the thyroid. The thyroid produces a couple of hormones that have to do with your metabolic rate. So T3s and T4s often increase your consumption of oxygen and increase your cellular respiration rate, the way that you break down foods and fats in order to release energy. Calcitonin is the other important hormone that is produced by the thyroid, and this is going to help regulate our calcium levels in our body. Traveling down just a little bit and looking at this thyroid and problems with it, we get hypothyroidism, where you produce too little of these thyroid hormones. There's lots of different causes of this. It can be caused by like cancer of the thyroid and so the neck area. But one of the common causes that we see of hypothyroidism is not enough iodine. We've actually in the US iodized salt. So we've added iodine to salt, and iodine is needed to produce your T3s and T4s, these metabolic rate regulators. And so sometimes if you have a defective thyroid, or you're just aging and not producing enough of these, or you don't have enough iodine, you can produce too little of these hormones. Sometimes this means that you gain a lot of weight suddenly because your metabolism has slowed down because these hormones aren't being produced in high enough quantities to run that cellular respiration and the way that we break down fats in our food. Hyperthyroidism is just the opposite. This is where you have too many of those T3s and T4s, and this can be caused by something called Graves' disease and some other factors as well. But Graves' disease often ends up with someone being very thin, with high blood pressure, overheating, so you sweat, and protruding eyeballs, like your eyeballs are almost like sort of the pressure in them make them stand out from your head. Now, this thyroid, on the back side of it, has 4 disc-shaped glands that are embedded in it, and these are called the parathyroid, and they secrete a hormone called parathyroid hormone, or PTH. And there's also hyper and hypo conditions where you have too much of these or too little of the PTH, and this upsets your calcium levels. Now, I want to talk about the thyroid and the parathyroid and calcium homeostasis. So one of the things that your body does in order to highly regulate and create a steady state of a particular chemical is sometimes it will partner antagonistic hormones, hormones that have opposite effects inside of your body, so that one can raise, one can lower different effects, and you can balance and keep a particular chemical in a very tight, narrow tolerance range. And this is what happens with calcium. You probably know calcium helps build your bones, and you've heard of this because the drink milk ads and things like that. But calcium has a lot of different functions inside of us. It helps control our nerves and muscle functioning. It helps us clot our blood. It helps with transport and opening gates and closing gates for transport mechanisms, and for bone development. So lots of different reasons why we need this particular mineral in high concentrations, or the correct concentrations, so that we can run these important body functions. So your body has 2 hormones that are antagonistic. They have opposite effects, so that you can toggle around and balance that calcium ever so tightly around a narrow tolerance range throughout your day. You have calcitonin secreted by your thyroid that lowers your calcium levels, and then you have PTH, or parathyroid hormone, that raises the calcium in your blood. So one is raising, one is lowering, and that allows you to really balance this calcium very tightly around these narrow sort of ranges that calcium is allowed. All right, how does this work? So you have a normal calcium level, and your body, again, wants to be around that normal level in homeostasis so that you can run all these important functions. Too much or too little can have drastic impacts on how your nervous system, your muscles, and your body's functioning. So if you were to eat a meal high in calcium, then your brain will recognize this. It will send a message to the thyroid to secrete calcitonin. Calcitonin stimulates over here your bones to take in excess calcium from your blood and your kidneys to release more calcium in urine so that your calcium in blood falls back to this set point. Now, if the opposite were to happen, where you skip a meal and your calcium starts to drop, your brain would also notice this and stimulate the parathyroid glands in the back of the thyroid, those four disc-shaped glands, to secrete parathyroid hormone. And parathyroid hormone goes to your intestines. It says that as food is passing, it raises some gates and opens gates to take in more calcium into your bloodstream. It also goes to your kidneys and has your kidneys save back more calcium into the bloodstream so that you're not losing it in urine. And it can even go to your bones and have calcium be released from your bones. All of these kinds of activities raise that blood calcium back to that homeostatic level. So by having one antagonist raise your calcium levels, one lower, you can toggle around really tightly around this homeostatic balance, this level of calcium that is needed in order to live. If we then summarize these two glands together, the thyroid is in the neck here. It secretes T3s and T4s. Those have metabolic impacts. And then calcitonin, which lowers your calcitonin or calcium levels in your blood. The parathyroid on the back of the thyroid secretes parathyroid hormone, which raises your blood calcium levels. All right, moving on. If we go lower into our gut, next to our duodenum under our stomach, we have the pancreas. And the pancreas also has a couple of functions. Remember, it has a digestive function in helping to secrete some enzymes that break down our foods. But some of these outer regions will also secrete two antagonistic hormones again. But this time, they are controlling the energy and the blood glucose levels that are in and around your body. The two antagonists are insulin, which you've probably heard of, which lowers your blood glucose levels, and your glucagon, which raises your blood glucose levels. All right, so let's take a look at these two antagonists and how they work. Again, your blood glucose has a very narrow, tight tolerance range. If you go too high and too low, this can affect your energy and the way that your cells are doing different tasks around your body. If you were to eat a meal rich in carbohydrates and rich in glucose and things like that, then again, your body would notice this and it would go to your pancreas and have your pancreas secrete insulin. Insulin is then going to open gates that facilitates taking blood sugar, so glucose, from your bloodstream and putting it into your cells so that you can use it for cellular respiration. Also, any excess glucose that is in your blood can also be stored for later use as glycogen in your liver. Both of these activities will take glucose from your blood and decrease that level back to that normal, narrow, tight tolerance range. If you were to skip a meal, then your pancreas notices this as well, and then it secretes something called glucagon. Glucagon goes to your liver and has the opposite effect of what insulin did up here. It actually releases that glucagon and breaks it apart, releasing glucose back to the bloodstream so that we can raise our blood glucose levels back to that tolerance range. So it's like a little balance that you have these two antagonists doing opposite effects so that we can tightly regulate our energy and our blood sugar. You probably have heard of diabetes, and diabetes comes in various forms, but diabetes overall is the body cells unable to sort of absorb your glucose in a correct manner. There are different types. Type 1 used to be called juvenile diabetes, but this is where insulin isn't produced correctly, and this can be autoimmune. It can be because there's damage to your pancreas, and so that you cannot produce it. Oftentimes we would notice this in children, and so that's where it got that name, juvenile diabetes. And a lot of these people are insulin dependent for much of their life. So they're on pumps, or they take insulin in order to control their blood sugar because they're not producing it, right, from their pancreas correctly. Type 2 diabetes is related to obesity, and it's often known as late onset diabetes, or used to be called that. This is where your cells don't respond correctly. Sometimes we call people insulin resistant. If the gates that are opening and closing due to insulin, to pull that blood sugar from your blood to your cells, if they don't open when insulin is around or close correctly, then that means that those gates aren't fluctuating correctly, so that we can bring our blood sugar down by taking the blood sugar from your blood and then putting it into your cells. Sometimes these people also, as you age, you don't make enough insulin, so they can make some, but maybe not enough. So some of these people also take insulin in order to regulate their blood sugar, or take some different things that help regulate these gates so that the gates are opening and closing correctly as well. Then there is a gestational diabetes. This is related to pregnancy, and it's usually the last trimester. The mother sometimes struggles to manage both the baby as it's growing, its blood sugar and her own. And so this is something that they test you for kind of as you're entering, sort of ending second trimester, entering that third trimester, and checking for this kind of diabetes. Typically, this kind goes away once the baby has been delivered. If we go from your pancreas down a little bit lower, just above your kidneys are two glands. They're triangular shaped. They're shown on this picture over here, and they secrete some hormones that help our bodies deal with stress. There is a central part of this adrenal gland, the medulla, and then an external part called the cortex, and they secrete different stress hormones, either short-term or long-term stress hormones. So let's take a look at these hormones. The adrenal medulla, that center part, secretes some hormones that you've probably heard of: adrenaline or noradrenaline, also known as epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are your fight or flight hormones. So when you're sort of under short-term stress, something very scary is happening to you, an accident or whatever, then these hormones do things like raise your blood glucose levels so you have plenty of energy, raise your blood pressure, your heart rate, your respiration rate, increase your metabolism so that you have foods being broken down so that you can release energy. It typically dilates vessels going to different organs that are needed in short-term stress, like your muscle system so that you can move very fast, in your brain, and these kinds of things to make decisions. Even your eyes dilate so that you can see better. And then it diverts blood away from systems, constricts it away from systems that aren't needed, things that you can do later, like your digestive tract. You can always digest your food later. You have to deal with an accident if it's happening, to save yourself. And so it will divert blood away from that digestive tract into these other systems. The adrenal cortex, that sort of outside sort of area, produces long-term stress hormones like corticosteroids, like glucocorticoids. These actually raise your blood glucose level. Sometimes negatively, they can depress your immune system so that you're open for opportunistic infections. But overall, these are going to help you manage sort of long-term stress across your life. Now, going a little bit lower, we reach our gonads, testes or ovaries. Testes produce some androgens, so testosterone, things like that, that help us with our sperm production, but also help determine some of the secondary characteristics that we would say are male characteristics, like hair in different places, or your voice box lengthenings with the Adam's apple and things like this. These particular testes also produce estrogen. Estrogen and testosterone are then balanced to secrete in secretions. You usually, as a male, produce a little bit more testosterone, a little bit less estrogen, but they think estrogen is important for sperm counts and things like that as well. Ovaries produce some hormones like estrogen and progesterone. These are for egg development and uterus development, and some of your secondary female characteristics as well. So those are all the glands that I want to cover with the endocrine system. If you take a look at your sheet, I want you to go through, just like I have done here, and work through your study sheet, printing off or labeling each of the glands and the hormones that they secrete. And then here's a little bit about hormone function, so form and function between hormones. And then the backside has these antagonistic sets and what they do in order to regulate your body and some problems. So take a look at that sheet, and I will see you on our Zoom class. Have a great day.